beauty, though sublime mighty name, that dost embrace nothing charming or insinuating, but requirest submission, and yet seekest not to move the will by threatening aught that would arouse natural aversion or terror, but merely holdest forth a law which of itself finds entrance into the mind, and yet gains reluctant reverence, though not always obedience, a law before which all inclinations are dumb, even though they secretly counterwork it. What origin is there worthy of thee? And where is to be found the root of thy noble descent, which proudly rejects all kindred with the inclinations? A root to be derived from which is the indispensable condition of the only worth which men can give themselves. Immanuel Kant. To Kant there is only one moral law, only one categorical imperative. But from this one moral law there follows a multitude of different specific moral duties. And those duties, in turn, can be categorized in two different ways that I addressed in my previous 3 lectures. Because, for one, you can divide all the moral duties into duties that we have towards other people, and on the other hand, duties that we have towards ourselves. But then at the same time, you can also divide all the duties into duties in the more narrow sense, the perfect duties, the duties of right, or duties in the wider sense, imperfect duties, duties of love. Which means that you end up with 4 different kinds of duties. Narrow duties towards others, duties of rights towards others, and duties of rights towards yourself, and duties of love or of virtue towards others, and duties of love or of virtue towards yourself. Those are the 4 types of duties. There is actually a 5th type in Kant, but that 5th type is very specific. It only includes one specific duty, the duty of joining a church, which I will only address when I get to Kant's philosophy of religion. So for now, there are these 4 types of duties. And this is what I want to talk about. I already had a lecture on the duties towards others. I had a lecture on the duties towards oneself. And I also had a lecture on the difference between the perfect and imperfect duties, between those duties of right and those of charity or generosity. But now I want to address once more all 4 together and how they fit together. This also gives me an opportunity, first of all, to address the well-known golden rule. The golden rule that you can already find in the Bible. The golden rule that says, don't do unto others what you don't want them to do to you, is often identified with Kant's categorical imperative. Of course, when people do that, they think only of the first of the most well-known formula of the categorical imperative, where the imperative says, act according to a maxim through which you can want for it to become a universal law. There are, of course, 2 more formulas of the categorical imperative that are completely different and cannot possibly remind anyone of the golden rule. All 3 formulas I already addressed in specific lectures. But Be that as it may, often you find people saying, oh, Kant didn't bring anything new in moral philosophy. His categorical imperative is just a new wording of the golden rule, and all he did was overcomplicate what could have been said much easier. Well, Kant himself is not of that opinion. Kant himself is obviously aware of the golden rule and he addresses it. And he would say that, to be sure, the golden rule is not wrong. So that means that it must be included in his categorical imperative. But it has two issues. One is the issue that the golden rule only tells you what to do, but not why you should do it. So it lacks a reason for morality, for moral action, for why this would be morally good. This is not so with Kant's categorical imperative. Here it is clear why it is an imperative, why it is our moral duty, because our own reason says so, our own reason. We are autonomous. We ourselves give ourselves a law. Our own reason has this insight that this is what ought to happen. And we cannot not do it without being in contradiction with ourselves. That's the whole point. That's what I already explained in previous lectures. With the golden rule, there is a number of possible reasons why you should follow it. Sure, you could interpret it in the light of Kant and the categorical imperative, but that's rarely done. Most of the time, people seem to understand the golden rule in one of two possible ways. Either they understand it to be some sort of advice of prudence that is ultimately about your own happiness, meaning you should not harm others so that they don't harm you in the same way. You should enter a sort of truce or contract with the others, saying, I will leave you alone if you will leave me alone. And this might be good advice. This might be prudent advice. Indeed, in most cases, to be happy, to lead a happy life, it would probably be best to treat others the way you want to be treated. But this is not a moral motivation, right? This is not about morality at all. Then this would then be selfish. You would do the right thing maybe, but for selfish reasons. Kant has shown, I discussed that in my lecture on the imperatives, Kant has shown that there are two possible principles of action, and one would be the principle of prudence, the principle of happiness, while the other would be the principle of wisdom, the principle of virtue. And they are not the same. You either act because you are after your own happiness, or you act to do what is morally right. The other way the golden rule is often understood is from the perspective of some ethics of compassion. So then it means don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you, because you see yourself in the others. Because when you do it to them and when they suffer, it should remind you that they are feeling beings capable of happiness and pain just like you, and that you wouldn't like this either. Which is, however, a completely wrong way to go about morality. And I discussed that too in a previous lecture, why the good heart and why compassion are not moral. So that's the one issue Kant takes with the golden rule. It leaves open why it should be followed, and therefore it can be interpreted from the perspective of prudence or from the perspective of compassion. The other issue, and here I come back to these 4 types of duties. The other issue is that it doesn't include those 4, Kant says. For one, the golden rule leaves out all the duties you have towards yourself. It only tells you how to treat others. But even when it comes to how you treat others, the golden rule does not include the acts of charity and generosity. It does not include, in other words, the wider duties. Because it usually just says, don't do to others what you don't want them to do to you. So sure, don't murder them, don't steal from them. But if one of the others is, let's say, poor, and you don't give charity to the poor, you have not actively harmed them. You have not done anything to them that you wouldn't want to be done to yourself. So in conclusion, out of the 4 types of duties, the golden rule only seems to include the duties of right toward others. So only one of the 4 types of duties. And even those, not fully, Kant says, because you can think of situations where you do something to others which you would not want to be done to yourself, but still you are acting righteously and are not harming anyone's human rights. Particularly, Kant thinks of punishment for the criminal, right? Let's say a criminal is sentenced to prison, then if we were operating by the golden rule, the criminal could tell his judges, hey, you wouldn't want to be imprisoned, so you are doing something to me that you wouldn't like to be done to yourself, so you are doing the wrong thing. But if we are operating by the categorical imperative, then we are not asking from the subjective perspective, would I like that or not? But we are asking from an objective perspective. We are asking, could this be a universal law? Could a world like this work? And then we clearly see criminals, people who have done some crime, being imprisoned in all cases, meaning I would also get imprisoned if I were doing some crime. That could work. That's a world that could work. While on the other hand, letting this guy go, because I tell myself, well, I wouldn't like to be imprisoned either, that would not work, right? If you think about it, not punishing criminals as a universal law, so not just this one particular guy, but all the criminals, never punishing them, would mean making lawlessness itself a law. It would be a universal law that says there shall be no laws, because if no one ever gets punished, then basically the laws, even if we keep them, they are just meaningless things written down in some meaningless book. No one would have to follow them because there would be no consequence if you break them. So for those 2 reasons, because the golden rule does not include why you should follow it, and because it doesn't include all the duties, but only the duties of rights towards others, and even those not fully. For these 2 reasons, you can say that the golden rule is like a specific case of the categorical imperative. Everything that is included in the golden rule is included in the categorical imperative, but not the other way around. But anyways, As I said, you can combine the two divisions of duties that Kant makes, and therefore end up with 4 types of duties. Where you can say that the duties of right are more negative. They are about not doing something. They are about having reverence for someone's rights. And the duties of love or of generosity, they are more positive duties. They are about someone's interest or purpose and helping with that interest or purpose. So the way Kant puts it is the duties of rights are about having reverence for someone's choice, right? Not interfering with his choice. So if someone chose to buy a car and to park it in his garage, if I now take the car and steal it and drive away with it, maybe he would have chosen to use it tomorrow morning and now he can't anymore. So I've interfered with his choice, and I've attacked his right to his property. So the duties of right are about reverence for someone's choice, while the duties of love are about helping with someone's wishes, right? The poor person wishes to have food this evening, so when I give charity, I help with that. And the difference to Kant is that the duties towards others are about the human, so the specific human individual. So having reverence for the rights of this human or helping with the purposes of this human. While the duties towards myself, as I explained in the respective lecture, are about not me as a specific human individual, but about humanity in me. So having reverence for the rights of humanity in me and furthering the purposes that humanity has in me. If you ask now about the 4 kinds of duties and what their underlying principle is, which they stem from, then I would say if you analyze it further, you will find that it is freedom. Kant's morality, as I explained in previous lectures, is not about what we usually associate with morality nowadays. It's not about suffering and happiness, preventing the one and promoting the other, but rather it is about freedom. So the duties of right are about preserving freedom, and the wider duties, they are about increasing freedom, be it the freedom of the other human being or be it the freedom of humanity in me. And with this in mind, I want to once more go through these 4 types of duties. Let's start with the narrow duties towards oneself. So, with having reverence for your own humanity. As I said, it's all about freedom. Humanity for Kant, what distinguishes humanity from animality is precisely its autonomy, its capacity to be free. So the right of humanity in me is to remain free, which is why you could summarize these narrow duties towards myself as not taking my own freedom away. That is precisely why to Kant suicide is immoral. It's very clear, I think, that by committing suicide you take your own freedom away. Likewise, Giving yourself willingly into slavery is immoral. Getting drunk is immoral. And surely we could say about this, even though Kant himself mostly speaks about drunkenness, we could generalize this and say that any sort of intoxication through drugs takes away your own freedom, takes away your own capacity to act as a rational being, a being that thinks about his actions and then acts according to its own insight. All of this is immoral. Kant also says we ought not to take away our own powers, our own capacity to act freely, and thereby also to help others. So the duties towards myself are really a condition for the duties towards others. Because if you don't have enough power in you to even take care of yourself, how would you take care of others? So this makes me think of many of the old Christian saints. If you read about them, about the saints of late antiquity and of the medieval age, if you read, for example, the Legenda Aurea, you will maybe be surprised, depending on your expectations, because you will find that many of these saints are considered saints not because they have actually done anything good. Like maybe many people would expect, oh, Christian saints, they probably all gave money to the poor and healed people and stuff. And of course, there are such stories also. But there's quite a number of stories of saints whose sainthood is grounded in the fact that not that they helped somebody else, but that they did not do something. So there's stories of virgins who were to be married off, but who wanted to retain their virginity. This is not even about refraining from premarital sex. This is about refraining even from marital sex. They wanted to retain their virginity. They refused to get married, and they would rather get tortured to death by, be it their father or be it the guy wanting to marry them, just to remain a virgin. And that's what made them so holy. Or likewise, you have stories of people who were fasting a lot, who fasted so much that they became completely malnourished, who half starved to death, who ended up so weak from fasting that they were just laying in their cell in some monastery and, according to the story, could not even get up anymore. So, in other words, they made themselves completely useless. I mean, they might as well have committed suicide. This is as close to suicide as you can get without actually dying. They were parasites. I don't see how there's anything holy about it. This didn't help anyone. All it did was making themselves weak, so they could not do anything good in the world, so they could not help anyone in the world. Now, this Kant would consider immoral. I like to use the example of wanting to be a lifeguard, wanting to pull out drowning people from the water. Sure, that's a good thing. You can try to do that, but you should first become someone who can actually swim. There's no use if you can't swim in jumping into the water when you see someone drowning, it will just mean that two people drown instead of one. Nobody is helped by that. So you need to first focus on yourself. And there's nothing immoral, there's nothing selfish about it here. If you focus on yourself so that you can focus on others, you should first work on your own powers. And when you have enough strength to keep yourself above water and to, on top of that, carry somebody else, then you can do just that. But you should not give up your own powers. You should not make yourself so weak that you can't even keep yourself above the water. For the same reason, Kant says you should not make yourself poor. Of course, you can become poor. If it just happens, if it's just some bad luck, some bad fate, it cannot always be prevented. It's not that Kant would say that poverty as such is immoral, of course, but you should not risk poverty too much. You should try to have enough money for yourself. So Kant would be against, and this we also find in the legends of saints, of course, would be against giving all your money to the poor. Sure, if you have something to give it. That's a good thing. But giving all your money to the poor and to those in need just means that now you are one of those in need. So all in all, the world has not really become better, because maybe there is only one side one less person in need because he got all your money, but on the other side there's now one more person in need. So all in all, there's as many people in need as before. No, Kant would say, first make sure that you yourself have enough to live, that you are secure, and then you can also take care of others. So the duties of rights towards the humanity in yourself, again, they are about not taking away your own freedom. And this means not weakening your own powers, be they physical powers, be they economic powers, not making yourself powerless and unfree. In general, Kant says it is a moral duty to not bring yourself into temptation. So that's why you should try to avoid poverty, because while poverty itself is of course not immoral, and you don't have to be a bad person just because you're a poor person, poverty is, Kant would say, a temptation to become bad. It is a temptation to start begging and thereby throw away your own human dignity and self-worth. It is a temptation to start stealing and thereby harm the rights of others. Likewise, Kant would say, try to avoid being hated. Of course, this too is something that is not in itself immoral. If somebody else hates you, that does not necessarily make you an evil person. Maybe it makes him an evil person, but not you. But still, Kant says you should try to avoid being hated if you can do that. Because being hated is again a temptation to hate the other person back. So these duties towards the rights of humanity in myself, they are the most important out of the four types of duties. They are the most important to Kant, because if you throw away your own freedom, your own dignity, that which gives you worth as a human being, if you make yourself a tool that can be used by others, you are worthless in your own eyes, and then you also cannot find worth in others' humanity and cannot have reverence for the humanity of others. all these narrow duties towards oneself, Kant says, are about living according to nature, to one's own nature, as a human being. And so he also says they can be described by the principle nature convenienter vive, which means just what I just said, live according to nature. What Kant means by that is, as human beings, we have a certain nature, and we have certain natural desires, and that's fine. Like, human beings, they have a desire for food, for drinking, for sleeping. They have sexual desires. They also have certain social desires. They don't want to be completely alone. And all of that is all right. Kant is not for what he calls the virtue of monks. He's not for a complete asceticism. Like, he's not completely against sex, for example, or about enjoying food, or even completely against enjoying alcohol. Like, as long as you don't overdo it and don't get yourself drunk, enjoying a glass of wine with your friends, it's something that Kant himself did. That's fine to him. But the point is, those are natural desires, and that's why they are fine. You can, however, have unnatural desires in society. Society, the way we are raised, the things we get used to, what the media feeds us, the things we are surrounded by, that creates in us desires that a natural human being, if you imagine how the human being would be without society, how the human being raised on a lone island would be, that a natural human being, that the savage, for example, simply wouldn't have. Think of all the desires, for example, for symbols of status, like the desire for specific brands. That is not a natural desire. If you need something, you might need the object, sure, but you don't need the object to be from a specific brand. Like, maybe you need a car. That alone is questionable. In many cases, you don't need a car, actually. Like, here where I live in Berlin, if somebody tells you they need a car, they are lying to you. Probably also lying to themselves. I always told them that my dad is a physiotherapist for decades, visiting patients always at their home, would every day have, I don't know, 5-6 patients all over Berlin that he would visit. He managed to do that with the train, with the public transport. So I don't see how you, if you work in some office, so you only have one place where you go in the morning and where you come back from in the afternoon, why you can't do that with the public transport. But of course, not every city has a good public transport, or the countryside doesn't have a good public transport. So fair enough. There might be people who actually need a car. But you don't need a Lamborghini or a Porsche. There is no possible scenario where a human being needs to drive a Porsche to be happy. That's just not a thing. If you think you need a Porsche or a Lamborghini or whatever for your happiness, then congratulations, you are not a human being. you are having an unnatural desire that you probably wouldn't have had if you had been a Stone Age person. Like the Stone Age person, if you could show him cars and explain cars to him, he would probably say, okay, that's cool. You can get quicker and more comfortably from point A to point B, much quicker than when I walk. So I can see how that's a good thing for you. But you probably couldn't possibly explain to the Stone Age person why this one car is so much greater than this other car from another brand, and why it's worth paying much, much more money for that. I mean, that's not something you need. That is something you let society convince you of needing. You've maybe seen too many influencers on social media bragging with their Lamborghini, driving with it through the streets of Dubai, and now you want to be one of them. That is not a natural desire. And the funny thing is that those people may think that they are the greatest, they may think that they are the shit. And sure, simple minded, unaufkläred people might actually fall for it. But in fact, they are pathetic. In the eyes of an aufkläred person like me, they don't gain more respect, they lose respect. Because they are unfree people. I mean, how pathetic can you be to let yourself be influenced by commercials and by social media and by society and the current society's standards? I mean, you know that these standards change. You know that 200 or 300 years ago, you would have been the shit by something else. You would have had to wear a white wig. And now you have to drive a Lamborghini. Those things are worthless. And if you let yourself be convinced that they do have worth, you are not free. You are not an independent thinker. And that is for all these brand things, right? Like, I can see how people could need a watch. Actually, I can't really see it nowadays because, like, you probably have a phone, and the phone is also a watch. So I often fail to see how people need a watch on top of that. But okay, fair enough, have a watch. Or at least in past decades, before people had phones, the watch definitely made sense. What does not make sense is needing a Rolex. You cannot possibly tell me that you need a Rolex for your happiness. It's simply not a thing. There is simply no reason why you can't do with a normal cheap watch. A watch has a function. It is there to tell you the time. A normal watch can do that just as well as a Rolex can. It's clearly not about the watch when you get a Rolex. It's about showing off. Oh, look at me. I'm rich enough to get a Rolex. And on top of that, I'm simple-minded enough, I'm easily influenced enough to actually care about letting people know how rich I am. To actually care about showing off to people a brand that is simply good because everyone says it is good. And so on and so on. I can see how you need a bag. I cannot see how you need to have a bag from Gucci. The bag has a function. It's there to carry stuff. Okay, you need to carry stuff around, but you don't need to carry stuff around in a Gucci bag. So those are unnatural desires, and having them is immoral. Because it means throwing away your own freedom. And even the natural desires, of course, Kant would say, can be twisted, can be perverted, because while we do have natural desires that are fine as such, in society, once again, the question is, how do we satisfy these desires? Like, sure, I have a desire to eat as a human being. That is fine. That is natural. But do I need to eat in fancy restaurants? Do I need to drink the most fancy wines? Probably not. Or I may have a desire to rest sometimes, to regain my powers that were drained out of me. That is okay. But do I need to go on vacation in some fancy location? Do I need to board a plane and to fly to the Caribbean or to Bali or whatever? I mean, clearly not. It's not that our ancestors, till very, very, very recently ago, speaking of merely some decades ago at best, that they were all, for all the thousands of years of human history, that they were all unhappy because they could not fly on vacation to the other side of the earth. That was simply not a desire they had. They were probably happy to have a day off, to just sit back and rest a bit, sure. But I didn't think that they needed to rest on some fancy beach in some fancy location. So, once again, the desire that is at the fundament of this may even be a natural desire, but it has been twisted into something unnatural. And the point is that, again, with this you throw away your own freedom. Kant would say it's one thing to enjoy something when you have the chance to enjoy it. Like, sure, if someone invites you and they offer you very fancy food and very fancy wine, it's okay to enjoy it, Kant would say. Again, he's not about total asceticism. He's not about this virtue of monks. He does not say that you need to only eat water and bread every day. But he would say that you should be able to live off water and bread without being unhappy. There could be any number of reasons to not have a certain type of food, even though you like it. Maybe this year there has been some bug plaguing the harvest and the food can simply not be had. Or maybe it turns out the food is unhealthy for you. Or maybe it turns out this particular food is very bad for the climate. It can only be grown using up lots of water, or it cannot be grown here at all. It must be bogged in by planes and so on. So maybe you are forced to not eat it, or maybe you could eat it, but your reason tells you that you shouldn't. Either way, there might be good reasons why you can't have this food. And if that's the case, then you should be able to refrain from it. Even if it's your favorite food, you should not be dependent on it. Any sort of dependency takes freedom from you and is therefore immoral. Any sort of dependency does not go together with your dignity as a rational being. And your dignity should be more important to you than some cheap pleasure, because you are not some animal that will do anything for pleasure. You are a human being. You should act accordingly. And it is pathetic how many people don't care about their dignity at all. Don't even think about it. Don't even realize that their dependency on things which by nature they don't desire They only desire because of society, because of habit and so on, but not because of their nature. So they added to their natural dependencies that they already have, they added new dependencies that they don't need to have, but now they have them. They don't even realize how this is undignified, how this is pathetic. And like I hear people saying stuff like in the climate debate, like I couldn't refrain from meat. I couldn't live without meat. I would, if that was true of me, I would feel ashamed of admitting that. Like, I would feel bad about it. I would try to hide it from people because it's pathetic. It's one thing if you say, I don't want to refrain from meat. Maybe I have good reasons to. Okay. But to say I couldn't, that's pathetic. How can you be this dependent on some specific food? It's just food. And you are a rational being. You have freedom. You have autonomy. You should be above such a thing. And often people are nowadays, they are so used to this luxury that we have that they don't even see anymore what level of luxury it is. They feel so entitled that even luxury is often considered some sort of poverty that no one should have to suffer through. Like when it comes to flying, I have such discussions with people, like for example here where I live, right? There are lots of Turkish people living here, so they will want to go to Turkey once in a while to visit the family maybe. And then many will fly. And when you talk to them, they will say they have to fly, which of course is a lie. You don't have to fly to get from Germany to Turkey. I mean, would be maybe one thing if they lived in America, but they live in Germany. You can get on a bus, and in about a day and a half, you're in Turkey. But of course, then they would say, what, a day and a half? I cannot spend a day and a half on a bus. That's such a waste of time, and that's so uncomfortable. And that seems very reasonable to most people. And if that seems reasonable to you, then you should really, really question yourself. Imagine you had a time machine and you could go back 1,000 years or 500 years or even just 100 years. And you could tell the average person in Germany, you could be in Turkey in 1.5 days. It's not gonna be a journey of many, many weeks and months that is gonna cost a lot because you have to go through many inns on, you have to take many stops on your way. It's not gonna be a journey that is gonna be dangerous because there might be bandits or whatever. It's not a journey that's difficult because you have to go through so many countries and so many borders and so on. No, you just board a thing that is like a big carriage, and then with this bus thing, a day and a half, and you are in Turkey. Those people would have been amazed. They would have said, what a luxury you have in your time. You can make such a long journey so short. You can travel so many hundreds of miles in such a brief time. But we are so used to our levels of luxury that even that, which until very, very recently ago in human history would have been unthinkable levels of luxury, now is too little for us. And here especially, it hopefully becomes evident why the duties of right towards myself to Kant are the foundation of morality, why they are important also for the duties towards others. Only if I retain my own freedom, my own independence, can I also be there for others. Right now, the fact that we have a climate crisis is because a very, very small global elite, and I never get tired of mentioning that if you fly once a year, you are amongst the 3% of the most flying people on Earth. 97% of the 8 billion people on this Earth fly less than once a year. Most of them, of course, have never seen a plane from the inside, but even those who have, most fly less than one a year. So a very, very tiny elite of only 3%, because they are such pathetic people who have thrown away their freedom, who have allowed themselves to develop unnatural desires, to become dependent on something which by nature, when they were born as children, they did not need, they were not dependent on. Only because of that, the living conditions of this planet are being ruined for everyone and for all future generations forever. But I will move on now to the wider duties towards myself, and they are about increasing my own freedom. Because the wider duties are always about promoting some purpose. Since this is about the duties towards oneself, it is about promoting the purpose of one's own humanity. But what is humanity? Well, to Kant, that which is characteristical of humanity is the ability to set yourself your own purposes, right? Animals cannot do that. The purposes they have are set for them by nature, by their instinct. They don't decide that they want to eat something or that they want to breed. It is just their natural instinct. Now, for humans, we of course are also sensual beings. We also have these natural desires, to be sure. But on top of that, we don't just have interests, we can take an interest in something. We can set a purpose for ourselves. And so that is precisely what humanity is about. That means, Kant says, if you only try to fulfill your desires, your sensual desires, if you only run after pleasure, if you only care about your happiness, then of course those are purposes you have, but they are purposes not of the humanity in you, but of the animality in you. Like every animal wants these things. You don't want these things insofar as you are a human being, but insofar as you are an animal. Even if you are a smarter animal and go about gaining pleasure in a smarter way, it's still an animalistic desire. So if you are only after this, all you care about in life, let's say, is eating, drinking, having sex, then you are living as an animal and you are throwing away your humanity. If humanity is about the ability to set yourself a purpose, then that means that the purpose of humanity as such is simply being able to set yourself purposes as much as possible, and to, of course, actually reach whatever purpose you set for yourself. In other words, being free. That is why the wider duties towards yourself are about increasing your freedom. So here Kant would say this is not just about living according to nature, not living against your own nature, but rather about going above your nature, not against it, but above it. In other words, this is about culture, right? Culture is the opposing word to nature. Nature is that which is born, right? This is where the word comes from in Latin. It's related to the word natal. So natare is being born, and nature is that which is born. So nature is that which is that way simply by being born, right? Which was not made that way, but it grew to be that way by itself. And then culture is about care, about, right, cultivating something means working on something, shaping something. That's why you have agriculture, when you care for the land, when you care for your field. It's not some wild jungle or whatever, but rather cultivated land is land that humans have shaped in a certain way. And Kant's moral philosophy is certainly not a cynical one. So the Cynics, most famously Diogenes in antiquity, but Kant also considers in his own time someone like Rousseau, a cynical philosopher. The Cynics more or less rejected society, rejected culture, said, let's go back to nature, the natural human being without twisted, without unnatural desires. That is the best human being. And Kant would say, no, that's just the one half. Sure, don't twist your nature, don't grow unnatural desires, but do cultivate your nature on top of that. So the perfect duties towards oneself can be summarized according to him by nature convenienter vive, live according to nature. The imperfect duties can be summarized by perfecte te, so make yourself more perfect. So Kant says we should gain control of and cultivate all our powers, the powers of our soul, our mind, our body. He says that we should work on cultivating whatever talents we have. He who does not make good use of his talents, who does not work on them and who does not use them in a good manner, deserves to be despised, Kant says. Kant would say that we should rule our powers and capabilities instead of being ruled by them. So, for example, our power of imagination, our fantasy, they should not run wild, because that would just lead to daydreaming, that would lead to maybe having unnecessary fears, because we always imagine the worst kinds of scenarios. And that would also need to, once again, having all these unnatural desires, because those come from the power of imagination, Kant would say, right? Those come from me thinking about, oh, how great would it be to go on vacation there, or how great would it be to own this fancy car or whatever. Rather, we should be able to be the masters of our imagination. And likewise, Kant would even say that we should be masters of our liking or disliking something. Like, we should not just accept it at face value that we happen to like this thing and reject another thing because we happen to dislike it. We should be able to think about it and to rationally think, is this good? Should I like this or not? Which reminds me of Nietzsche's definition of objectivity, which is the ability to have your for and against with yourself. So um, to not be a slave to your for and against, to not be pulled in one direction or another, but rather to stand here where you stand and make your own judgment and decide in which direction you want to go. And it's all the abilities that we have. Like, for example, Kant says we need to be masters of our attention. We need to be able to decide to pay attention to something, right? It's even in the way we say it. We pay attention to something. It's an active act. Too many people are not aware of that. Too many people allow themselves to just have attention or not have attention to something, and in most cases not have attention, right? The attention spans, thanks to social media, thanks to stuff like TikTok, they just get worse and worse. Like many young, especially young people, they are not able to read a book. And of course there are countless terrible books that shouldn't be read, but I'm saying once again, you should make a rational judgment. Is this a book that should be read? Is this a book worth reading? But many people, even if they would judge this is a book worth reading, they couldn't do it. They could not even listen to a lecture for an hour or two, such as this. They could probably be at a point where many can't even watch a movie, especially if it's not an action movie where something is happening every 5 seconds, which is the reason that many people can't appreciate older movies that generally were slower paced, right? They need something constantly to get their attention, to catch their attention, because they are unable to pay attention to something. They are not masters of their own attention. They cannot choose to focus on something because they want to. But likewise, Kant says, we should not just be masters of our attention, but also of our ability of abstraction, which to Kant is actually the opposite, because he defines abstracting as taking away your attention from something, right? So if you're on the subway and you're having a conversation with your neighbor next to you, there are probably other conversation happening all around you, and you should be able to abstract from them. So don't get distracted by them. Don't pay attention to what the people next to you are saying, because you only pay attention to this one person that you are actually talking to. Many people can't do that. Many people are constantly distracted by small things, and many people are so focused on their sensitivities, on small things that annoy them. Like even here, I've already gotten comments, someone saying, "Oh, you have an annoying voice. I can't listen to that." I mean, sorry, I guess, if my voice is annoying. I only have the one. I cannot really change it. But what I can say is that this is not something I've ever had. And I've listened to a lot of lectures in my life, be it at university, be it here on YouTube, where I listen to lectures, and there has never been a single case where I listened to a person and told myself, oh, that person has an annoying voice, I will not listen to that lecture. That's just, I would feel pathetic. Again, I make a rational judgment. Is this a good lecture? Is this a lecture worth listening to? Is what is being said here, is it something that I should hear? And if that's the case, I will put up with any voice, no matter how annoying it might be. It's not even something that comes to my mind, because I am able of abstracting from whatever the voice is and of focusing only on the content. And this is something, once again, you should cultivate in yourself. You should train for yourself, because it means being more free. Likewise, what Kant also says is we should increase our knowledge, no matter on what matters, because there's this well-known phrase that could easily sound very cynical, that knowledge is power, but you could understand it in the sense of knowledge is freedom, right? The more you know, the more free you become. This starts with small, trivial things. If you know how to bake a certain cake, you have the freedom to bake it, right? If your grandma always makes this one cake and you like it, but now she dies and you never asked her for the recipe, then now with her the cake died too, and you don't have the freedom anymore to ever eat that cake again in your life. But if you had asked her to share her knowledge of how to make the cake with you, then you could still make the cake and would be free to eat it whenever you want. And if you have the knowledge how to start a certain machine and how to use it, then you can use it. And if you have knowledge of a language, then you can read books in that language that are not translated. You can communicate with people in that language that might not speak another language. So you gain new freedoms that otherwise you wouldn't have. Now, I said in the lecture on perfect and imperfect duties that the latter are actual duties, but they are duties where it is left to our own power of judgment to judge how exactly we should go about them. When I gave examples, I mostly used the examples of duties towards others, right? So I said we may have the duty to help the poor. Sure, that is something that is an actual duty, but the question is how. So if I donate money, how much money is enough? When do I have done my duty? And where should I donate the money to? To this poor person, to this poor person, rather to an organization, and to which organization? Or is there other things besides donating money that I can do? Can I volunteer? Can I get into politics and try to fight poverty more systematically? That is up to my own judgment. And that is true here when it comes to the wider duties towards myself as well. In general, I should perfect myself, I should cultivate myself, but it's clear that I can never become fully perfect. So the question is, what precisely should I do? I could learn something, but what? One person may learn an instrument, another person may learn a sport, like I said earlier, learning how to swim properly and to also pull others out of the water. Another person may study medicine. I can do any number of things. I can try to get better at my social skills. I can try to be touchable and to touch others, to be someone who can work with people, maybe work with children, maybe work with traumatized people or whatever. I can try to get better at the way I express myself so that I get better at explaining things to people. I cannot do everything. And you cannot say that learning this specific thing is more of a moral duty than learning this other specific thing. Rather, the moral duty is just to, in general, cultivate yourself, increase your freedom, but it is left to your judgment what to do specifically. Of course, the ideal is becoming, so to say, the perfect human being, becoming everything a human being could be. So all possible abilities a human could have, I should strive for. So I should strive for not just learning this or that language, but learning every language there is. I should strive for learning every instrument there is. I should strive for collecting all knowledge that there is to be found, that human beings have. I should strive for having every possible ability that I could have. Of course, I will never, in the short span of a human life of some decades, I will never get even close to that. But I should live my life in such a manner that if I lived eternally and eternally continued in that same manner, I would eventually fully realize my human potential. I would eventually become this perfect human being. In fact, however, Kant says it is the special case with the human species. I will talk more about this when I get to his anthropology. It is the special case with humans that for them, perfection can never be achieved in the individual, but only in the species. Meaning, the individual human being will always remain imperfect, but all individuals taken together, we could indeed be perfect. We could indeed realize all our potential as human beings. If every one of us got perfect at one thing, then together we would be perfect at all the things, right? So, for example, I have taken the path of a scholar. Of course, even as a scholar, I'm very much limited. Like, maybe I can get pretty perfect as a Kant scholar. I have read all 29 volumes of Kant's collected works, so I've read more Kant in my life than most people ever have or ever will. But even when it comes to other philosophers, my knowledge is less perfect. Depending on the philosopher, I mean, there's some other philosophers that I've read completely, like, and other thinkers, non-philosophers, like I've read Fichte completely, I've read Nietzsche completely, I've read Freud completely. Others I've read lots of, like Reich, like Arendt. There are others of whom I've read a few works, others of whom I've read one work or some pages or nothing at all. And outside of philosophy, there are other parts of scholarship that I'm clueless about. Like, I don't know much about chemistry or about the history of the Inca. And if you go outside of scholarship, of course, there are many things that I cannot do. Like, I cannot sew, or I cannot play any instrument, for example. But others can, who in turn know nothing about Kant. And so all of us together, we can reach that perfection that human beings should strive for, Kant would say. Here we can also see once more the connection between the duties towards ourselves and the duties towards others, and how the latter depend on the former. Because the more free you are, the more you can do for others, right? The more abilities you have, the more you can help others. Like, once again, if you learn how to swim, you can possibly help others that are drowning. If you don't have this ability, then you also can't help others in this specific situation. So we should always try to educate and to cultivate ourselves and to get better at whatever we do in order to realize our own humanity and thereby also be more useful to others. Kant would say it is a moral duty to be and a matter of my own dignity, right? This is what gives me value, to be a useful member of society, to actually contribute something. Now, unfortunately, we live in a very egocentrical day and age. So there was once this ideal of education being something that has a worth in itself, that is part of the human dignity, and being a lifelong goal. That was the ideal of the humanists and the Renaissance, and the age of aufkläring had taken up that ideal. But that is no longer the ideal. Now, education is seen as a means to an end. The end being having a job and making money. So this starts in school, where the students are asking questions like, oh, why do I have to learn integrals? Why do I have to learn how to interpret a poem? Can't I rather learn something that I need, like how to do my taxes? This stuff I won't need on the job market. Which, to be sure, will be correct in most cases. You won't need it on the job market. But these students, of course, it doesn't come out of nowhere. Of course, they have been talked, saying these things by the society they grew up in. They are just expressing that society's priorities and ideals, but they don't realize how they are throwing away their own dignity, how pathetic it is what they are saying, oh, I don't care to be a fuller, more complete human being. I don't care about learning something for its own sake, simply because it's a good thing to learn. No, I wanted to be useful on the job market. So I want to completely submit myself to the demands of this job market. I want to be a good tool, and that's all I care about. And then it goes on. You go maybe to university, but most people probably don't do that because they genuinely care about learning something, about expanding their horizon, but rather to get a degree and through that get a job. We live in an age where most people want to be passive. That is, they just want to receive pleasure, they just want to enjoy. And sure, they will do some sort of activity in their job, but probably just because they have to. They have to be active in order to be able to be passive, right? They have to be active, they have to work in their job to make money so that they can then afford to enjoy pleasures. But if they could skip this part, they probably would be only passive. If they could afford to just lay around and just be served drinks or whatever, if they could just be rich, they would probably prefer that. Um, while a true human being wants to not be passive, I mean, that's for non-rational beings, for non-free beings, right? A stone is passive. It doesn't move if you don't kick it. A human should want to be active, to actually do something. But for most people, they don't see their education, they don't see learning as a lifelong goal. Once they have finished their few years of university, once they have their degree and then their job, that's enough for them. So that's also why most people don't have much work ethics in their job. They don't have this goal of being as best as possible at their job. I mean, maybe some people in the first years when they are starting their job, they start out highly motivated, they have a lot of enthusiasm, like, let's say, teachers. There's young teachers who are very enthusiastic about teaching and wanting to help the kids. But then after time, reality sets in. They probably see it's not so easy, and many will give up, and Many will fall into some sort of routine, and many will fall into complacency, and many will be content just doing their job, just getting their money, and not trying to be better. And again, maybe even taking the money without doing the job if they can. Like here in Germany, there's just been this little scandal of some teacher who had pretended to be sick for 15 years. And the thing is that teachers, they, or all the state officials, when they are sick, they get the full money. Not just a little, no, they still get the full money. Which in her case meant like 5 or 6 thousand euro per month of our tax money. So for 15 years. This woman is clearly a parasite. This woman should clearly feel ashamed of herself. She probably followed the purpose of her animality, which enjoyed just having an easy life, just being able to do whatever she liked. But she completely threw away her humanity, her human dignity, and probably didn't even feel it. But even if people do work in their job because they have to, they generally don't try to become better. I mean, let's stay with teachers. How many teachers you study at university for maybe like 5 years? That's not, let's face it, you don't become an expert in your subject in that time. That gives you the most superficial overview. But how many teachers actually care to keep learning about their subject? Like you're a teacher for several decades. Do you try to get better at what you teach? Probably not in many cases. The average German teacher here in Germany doesn't care for German literature. It's not that in their free time they read the famous German poets. I mean, I don't know why you would even study this subject if you don't care about it, but the answer is, of course, it's an easy job. It's a secure job, it's a well paid job, so that's good enough. And then only when the curriculum says you now have to read this play by Goethe with your students, then maybe for the first time in their life they will take a look at this play that otherwise they would have never read. Or philosophy teachers. I had philosophy teachers at my school that freely admitted to not reading philosophy. They were on some event day, they were asked by one student if he actually read the Critique of Pure Reason, and these two teachers they looked at each other and laughed and said no. Or yeah, maybe while I was studying a few pages of the introduction, and that's all. And they had been teachers for, I think, well over a decade at that point. So I would feel ashamed of myself to year after year keep teaching students about something, in this case about Kant, which by my own admission I don't know. So keep teaching from a point of ignorance and incompetence, and keep teaching them nonsense. And they really did teach nonsense there. Like it's gross how many errors they made, how many completely wrong things they claimed about, be it Kant or be it other philosophers. And so on. I remember I had a biology teacher who was rather old already, and apparently, since her own days of studying, had not bothered to keep up with her subject. But of course, if you have studied, let's say, biology or chemistry or physics or history 30 years ago, whatever you learned is 30 years later, of course, completely outdated. And that's a huge problem in schools, right? That many teachers teach not the current state of a science or of a studies, but rather some outdated stuff that they learned in their day. So I had this biology teacher, and I remember having discussions with her because she taught us that only mutations get inherited, get passed on. Modifications only concern the individual and don't get passed on. And that's in fact not entirely true. It's not that simple, which biology eventually found out. And I already knew in 2011, 2012, around that time is when I had this discussion, but she wouldn't listen to me. So this is an issue. It's of course not an issue just for teachers, it's for everyone. Like as a kindergartner, you could try getting better at dealing with the children, making the children feel comfortable where they are, helping the children find their way into life. Also, you could try getting better with the parents, right? Because it's not just about raising the children, you also need to raise the parents at the same time. But they don't do that. They go through their apprenticeship, and then they have their job and they do their routine. Or as an artist, no matter if you're a writer or a musician or whatever, you could always try to hone your craft, to become better, to become more refined. But most who are successful will just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So, of course, I'm not saying this is everyone. I myself learned from my dad, who, as a physiotherapist, would always keep working on his understanding of movement and on his trying to get things across to his patients. I learned this ethos, and I will certainly, for the rest of my life, work on my philosophy, read more, try to understand more, and also try to work on getting it across to people, on explaining things to people better so that they actually understand. And I'm not saying I'm alone in this. Of course, in probably every job, you will find people who actually take their job seriously. But also, in probably every job, they will be in the minority. The majority of people have no sort of job ethos. They don't even have a job pathos. So they don't take these wider duties of perfecting yourself, of cultivating yourself very seriously. But with that, I want to pass on to the duties towards others. And once again, I want to start with the narrower duties, with the duties of rights. And these two are about freedom. This time, of course, not your own, but rather the freedom of others, which again, you must not take away. Of course, all of what I said does not mean that it is against the duties towards yourself to take care of your own happiness. Not only is it not against these duties, it can even help you in fulfilling them. While, according to Kant, making yourself happy is not in itself your moral duty towards yourself. I discussed that in the lecture on the duties towards oneself. He does say that it can be a sort of mediate duty because it can be a means to fulfilling your duties. Because once again, you should, if you can avoid it, not get yourself into temptation. And unhappiness is a big temptation to become evil, Kant would say. Again, if you are poor, then you are tempted to beg or to rob, and so on. So it would be better to be as happy as possible, because then you would be in a state where you can be most helpful to others also. However, Kant does say that usually those who live a simple life, not a life of complete lack and misery, so not a life in complete poverty, but a simple life. So who are not too wealthy, not too rich, um, actually tend to be morally better people than those who have too much luxury. So while happiness can be a precondition to do moral acts, while increasing your own happiness can get you in a state where you can easier help others, there might be such a thing as too much. And we can find that in our days if we just look at statistics, where we find that it is not the richest people who give the most by percentage of their income who donate the most of money. And Kant explains this by saying that the more you have, the more also your desires grow. So, in that sense, the people who have the most don't necessarily have the most, because they are also probably the people who want the most, and therefore who lack many things that they would want. With more luxury come more unnatural desires for luxury. I mean, just look around at the super rich of our world, right? Think of how recently Jeff Bezos got married and basically rented all of Venice for that. Who needs that? Like, when I think of getting married, I would maybe want a nice day with my wife, maybe some close friends, maybe, I don't know, go eat in some restaurant, and that's it. I don't need a whole city for that. I don't need to spend so and so many millions on that. Or think of how Taylor Swift uses her private jet every day. No one can tell me that it's necessary. No one can tell me it's necessary at all to have a private jet. I mean, I don't have a private jet, and I'm a pretty happy person. There's not been a single day in my life where I woke up and lamented, oh, I so wish I could fly somewhere now in my private jet, but I don't have one because I'm not rich enough, so I must be unhappy. Those are not natural desires. They are, however, desires that cause a lot of harm in this world. And so when you look around, you won't find a single billionaire nowadays who is a good person. It's simply not possible. It's a self-contradiction. If they were good people, they would probably not have gotten to where they are. Or if they were good people, they would probably give away most of what they have. Every single billionaire we have right now is a completely rotten person who needs to stand in front of an international court. But with that, I want to stop talking about the duties towards oneself, and I want to switch over to the duties towards others. And once again, I want to start with the narrower duties, with the duties of right. These, once again, are about freedom and about not harming freedom. But of course, this time not the freedom of humanity in me, but the freedom of other human beings. Kant says that any modification done to someone's state is immoral. So, of course, if you murder someone, you have altered his state pretty drastically. But even smaller things like shoving someone aside or pouring water over someone still means you are attacking that person's freedom. The person is free, that means only he himself should change his own state, however he deems right. You should not change his state for him. So any alteration of another state is immoral, of course, with the exception if he consents to it. So sure, doing surgery, maybe removing an organ, is also a way to modify someone's state, which is precisely why you can't just randomly knock out people and perform surgery on them. But if they consent to it, then of course that is another matter, because in this case their freedom is not being infringed upon, right? You are rather helping them to achieve whatever they freely chose to achieve. But respecting others' rights, to Kant, of course, is not limited to not making any physical modifications to them. He also says that things like arrogance, gossiping about others, mockery, that they are also harming others' rights. Now, when it comes to the wider duties towards others, the question what they are about becomes a little more complex, because once again, the wider duties are always about furthering some purpose. And in this case, it's not the purpose of your own humanity, it's the purpose of the other people. Well, Kant says, what is the purpose that all human beings have in common? It is the purpose of happiness. Of course, they may disagree and differ in regards to what specifically makes them happy, but they all want to be happy. And so, furthering others' purpose in the most general way means making others happy, helping them in their happiness. And so Kant would say that is what the wider duties towards others are about. And all the things you may do to help them, like giving charity to the poor or pulling out a drowning person from the lake, it's really about their happiness, right? The poor person will be happier with some money. The drowning person will be happier if he survives. So while there may be specific wider duties towards others, namely Kant lists charity, gratefulness, sympathy, they all come down to making others happy. And here, if you think about this critically, Kant is not quite right. There are some issues here. Because on the one hand, Kant has said that happiness is not what the wider duties towards oneself are about. Right? They are about increasing our freedom, not increasing our happiness. I explained this further in the lecture on the duties towards oneself. And Kant's reason that he gives is that he says, well, happiness for ourselves is what we want anyways. So it cannot be a duty, because every you ought comes too late, and we could always reply, well, I already want. So whatever is my alleged duty is something I want anyways. This may be right, but then when it comes to the duties towards others, it's also possible that something is my duty which I also want, right? Sometimes I want to help others. Sometimes I have my own reasons. Maybe that other person, it's my duty to save his life when he's drowning, but maybe he's also a loved one. Maybe this is my best friend or my child, so I want to save his life anyways. That does not change the fact that it is also my duty for Kant. Because for Kant, what matters in morality, and I explained that in the lecture on the goodwill, what matters is that we don't just do what is our duty, but that we also do it because it is our duty, and not because it also happens to make us happy. So I'm a good person not if I pull this drowning person from the water, but if I pull him out because it is the right thing to do, not just because I like him. So if that is the case when it comes to duties towards others, I don't see why we couldn't possibly say about the duties towards myself, I am good if I make myself happy, not because I want that anyways, but because it is the right thing to do. But then, On the other hand, when it comes to the wider duties towards others, here suddenly it's not about perfecting them, cultivating them, increasing their freedom, but rather about making them happy. And here Kant is very inconsistent. Here Fichte, coming after Kant, was more consistent, because he would also say that we should also try to increase the freedom of others. And he would say that there is no duty to make others happy specifically, but to make them more free. So he would say when you give to the poor, it's not about making him happy, it's about increasing his freedom. He now, when he has money, has the freedom, he doesn't have to beg anymore, he can buy things for himself. Or when you save someone's life, it's not about, sure, that will also probably make him happy, but it is about saving his freedom. And if you think about it, the 4 kinds of duties that Kant mentions, when 3 kinds of them are about freedom, you have a duty to keep your own freedom, and you have a duty to increase your own freedom, and you have a duty to keep others' freedom. And then one of them is not about freedom. You don't have the duty to increase others' freedom, you have a duty to increase their happiness. That should make you suspicious that maybe something is inconsistent here. And also consider what I discussed in the lecture on the imperatives, that to Kant there are only 2 principles of action. The principle of eudaimonia, which is the happiness principle, and the principle of eleuteronomy, which is the principle of free lawgiving, the principle of morality. And Kant's whole practical philosophy is basically about rejecting eudaimonia as a principle of action, saying that our actions should not be about happiness, but about free lawgiving. So I would say Kant here made a mistake. He, without thinking enough, accepted the teachings of the moral philosophy of his time, because before Kant already they talked, try to make others happy. Of course, they also talk, try to make yourself happy, that's the duty toward yourself, and that Kant questioned critically and ultimately rejected. But in this other case, he failed to fully apply his own philosophy, is what I would claim. Because if you think through what Kant is saying, that you have a duty to make others happy, well, from that you could also follow that you should give the drug addict his drugs, because that will make him happy. Of course, that would be very immoral, and I'm sure Kant himself would find it immoral and reject it. But from that rejection precisely, he could have realized that happiness cannot be the principle here. The principle is freedom. The drug addict might be happy if you give him drugs, but you are actually thereby contributing to him losing his freedom, becoming even more addicted, or staying addicted at least. You should rather help him overcome his addiction and thereby gain more freedom. Now, what reason does Kant even give why he says it is a duty towards others to increase their happiness, but it is not a duty to contribute to their perfection? Then indeed it is a duty to contribute to your own perfection. Well, the reason he gives is that he says the perfection of humanity lies precisely in the ability to give yourself a purpose, right? It is about your own freedom, after all. And therefore, Kant says, every person can only choose for himself what his perfection is. You cannot choose for somebody else. This, of course, is right, but I wouldn't say that from that it follows that you cannot help others in their perfection. It just means that if you help them, you actually have to accept their own freedom. You cannot force your own concept of perfection upon them. So Like, for example, parents should not force their children who don't want to go to ballet class or to go to violin class because the parents think that this would be good, this would make their children more refined. Maybe are their concepts of perfection, but maybe the child has another idea of what perfection is. Or the parents should not force the children to learn Chinese just because they think that China is growing and becoming more important. And so in the world of tomorrow, it will be useful to know Chinese. But if the child itself says it wants to learn Chinese, then the parents should help with that, not because it would make the child happy, but because it is a way for this child to cultivate itself. So the parents should, if they can, try to find the best possible teacher and so on for the child. Of course, helping someone else with his perfection, it does not simply mean helping him reach whatever goals he might have set for himself, because those might be bad goals. So it does mean helping him first find the right goals, find the right purposes. But of course, Kant is right that this should not be done with force. I should not just say, oh, I know better what's best for you, I know better what you should do, so just follow my lead. Even if I am right. Like if I tell the drug addict, you want the drugs, but I know better that this is bad for you and that you should stop wanting this, you should stop making this your purpose. Even if this is right, again, the true perfection of humanity is humanity's freedom. We should not just be robots, even well-programmed robots. So there is no worth as such in someone doing the right thing if he does it only because I made him do it, because I forced him to do it. Rather, it is only good if someone does the right thing because he himself has thought about it and has understood that it is the right thing and does it for that reason. But from that, once again, it doesn't follow to me that we cannot help others in their perfection. From that, it just follows that the true content of the wider duties towards others is aufkläring. We should help others become more aufklärt. And that is precisely what Fichte later would more directly say. But even in Kant, you will sometimes find him saying that helping others in their Aufklärung and in their moralization is indeed amongst the wider duties towards others. But that is what we should do, I would say. We should try, and of course what I try to do with these lectures in my own way, we should try to help others become more aufklärt, that is more rational, more thinking, more critical, more independent beings who actually think about what their purpose should be and to pick the right purpose, not because they have been made to do it, but because they themselves have understood it to be the right purpose. If you think about it, if we were to follow Kant here in this inconsistency of his, then it would also lead to the following absurd situation. That is, you yourself have the moral duty to not make yourself happy, but to make yourself more perfect, more free. The other person, by himself, from his own perspective, also would have the duty not to make himself happy, but to make himself more perfect, more free. But if he is not a good person, that is, if he doesn't follow this duty, doesn't care about his perfection, only cares about his happiness, then I, if I am a good person, would now be compelled or would now be obliged to actually keep him in this immorality of his, where he only cares about his happiness, and to actually help him achieve this immoral desire of his instead of helping him become more moral, instead of helping him become someone who cares about that which he actually should care about. That's absurd. That would mean that morality tells me to be the good shepherd to the mindless sheep, who cares for them, who makes them happy, but who doesn't do anything to turn them into more than mindless sheep ever. And that is something which Kant explicitly rejects when it comes to the state, which he calls despotism when it comes to the state, because he says even well-meaning despotism is still despotism. If the state, if the government tries making people happy, not just create the conditions so that people can make themselves happy, that is, make people free, but rather make them unfree and then force them to be happy, that is a despotic government. But if Kant rejects this for government, if he rejects this in the state, why should it be right on the level of the individuals? So I hope you can see that it is Kant here who is inconsistent, and that I'm more in line with Kant than he is himself in this point. And that's an important point. When you deal with a philosopher, when you encounter an error, when you have something where you need to disagree with the philosopher, and of course that may always be the case, because the philosopher too is just human, he makes errors. But there are two possibilities then. Either the error stems from his own philosophy, from his own philosophical principle, then you need to reject not just this specific opinion of his, but his philosophy as a whole, if you want to reject this opinion. Or it is the other way around, and the error comes precisely from him not thinking his own philosophy through in this case, not applying his own philosophy. And that is, as I hope you can see, the case here with Kant. So in this instance, I'm not rejecting Kant, I'm rejecting Kant not being Kantian enough, and I'm being more Kantian than him. Then I say that all four kinds of duties come down to freedom. All the duties of right, be it towards myself or towards others, are about retaining freedom, protecting freedom, and all the duties of love, all the wider duties, be it towards the humanity and myself or be it towards others, are about increasing freedom and not about happiness. And as Kant says, this means that the narrower duties, the duties of rights, are more regulative. They regulate freedom and they make sure that freedom does not contradict itself and destroy itself, which is always very important to Kant. I discussed it in my lecture on freedom, that to Kant there's this difference between the wild freedom and the freedom under the law, and that to him wild freedom, because it is completely unrestricted, because there is no law regulating it, always ends up destroying itself. You always end up not being free at all. And the wider duties to Kant are not regulative, they are constitutive. Because they don't just regulate freedom and make sure that it doesn't destroy itself, rather they create something, namely more freedom. They actually increase freedom. They actually make sure we have more abilities, make sure we have more choices, make sure there is more possibilities of what we can do. With that, I'm at the end of the lecture. I just want to add one more point, and that is that we do have these two types of duties, and as I explained in the lecture on the perfect and imperfect duties, according to Kant, they depend on reverence and love. But Kant points out that this is only true amongst human beings. If we consider God, and then from both sides, ours and his, there is only one of these two feelings, reverence or love. Because Kant would say we can, of course, and should and need to have reverence for God. Like, the only way you cannot revere God is if you believe there is no God, but if there is a God, he must be revered simply because he is the most perfect being there is. If anything deserves reverence, it is his. It is him, because he is holy, because he is free. So out of reverence, we should do his will. Out of reverence, we should follow his commandments. However, what we cannot do is we don't have duties. We only have these duties of reverence. We don't have duties of love towards God. Because those duties, again, they are constitutive. They are about giving something to the other. And what could you possibly give God? And here it's not even important what you think the duties of love, what you think their content is. Like, whether you go with Kant and say the content is making others happy, or whether you go with Fichte and myself and say the content is making others more free, well, God doesn't need either from you. He already is the fully happy, the fully blessed being, and he also already is the all-powerful being. So you cannot possibly increase his happiness or his freedom. Now, on the other side, when it comes to how God treats us, then Kant would say God cannot have reverence for us because we are so far beneath him. I mean, from his perspective, we are the most imperfect, the most pathetic beings. He is holy, we are not. Why should he have reverence towards us? We have no rights against God. There is nothing where God would need to take a step back and respect our rights, and where we could complain if he doesn't, where we could justly say, God, you are not allowed to do this to me because this is against my rights. No, God can do anything to me and it can never be wrong. However, from God's side, there's love. God does give to us. He does not hold back respecting our rights, but he gives. God is generous. God is benevolent. Indeed, Kant would say it is only thanks to God's benevolence, thanks to God's love, that we can hope to get into heaven. Because if God was only just, completely and utterly just, and being a just judge at the end of days, then all he could do is either send us to hell for our sins, or if we hadn't sinned, say, okay, you are innocent, you don't get punished. But Kant says a judge doesn't reward. He punishes or he doesn't punish. The law only knows of you either breaking the law and therefore deserving punishment, or of you keeping the law and therefore merely having done your duty, which is not deserving of a reward. So God's justice doesn't get us into heaven. It is the fact that on top of being just, God is also benevolent and loving, which will lead to us possibly getting into heaven, Kant says. So when it comes to the relationship between us and God, from both ends, there's only one thing. from us, there's only reverence, but there cannot be love towards God. Of course, by love here, I will point you back to my lecture on reverence and love, on perfect and imperfect duties, where I said that to Kant there are two kinds of love. There is the love of complacence, so liking the object of your love, and there's the love of benevolence, so wanting to do something good to the object of your love. And the love of complacence is, of course, possible towards God. We can like him. Indeed, we must. Again, there's no object being more worthy of this kind of love than God. But the love, the active love, the love of benevolence, where you actually do something good and helpful for the other, that love is not possible towards God. Only reverence is possible towards God. It's so this is not about how we feel pathologically. This is about our actions. Actively, we can only express reverence and not love towards God. And God, on the other hand, towards us cannot actively act with reverence, but he can act with love. And in this case, it's not the love of complacence. Maybe he doesn't like the way we are because we are very imperfect, very sinful. But it is the love of benevolence that is out of his generosity, maybe forgiving our sins and still helping us. But only amongst humans can and should you have both reverence and love. And as I said in that other lecture on those two, the perfect unity, the perfect balance of reverence and love is what Kant would call humanity. And the most perfect humanity, according to him, is found in friendship. My deep thanks be to my supporters, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Samet Özkilic, Yasin Özün, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.